All right, how's it going, everybody? So the purpose of this video is pretty straightforward. I just want to know how everybody out there decides whether or not something that they've heard is true or a claim that somebody's made. I've had this idea for a while. I've done this a lot. I've done this with students in my class or people that I kind of disagree with heavily. I've made this list of kind of things that we can use to decide what's true, and I want to see where other people's kind of intuitions or ideas are on this idea of kind of like holding yourself to a standard when you decide something's not true, because we have this kind of era of fake news, right? Or there's all these difficulties with changing minds, and I want to see if something like this could help it at all. The idea here kind of starts with starting off from a place where you don't have any assumptions about things. So kind of like starting from scratch in terms of knowledge. Pretend you know nothing, and how do you build from there? So once we know nothing, this is Descartes, Rene Descartes, kind of came up with this idea and started making assumptions about what he thought was true. And we don't always agree on what these assumptions are, but the purpose of this video and this activity is to see if we can plot some areas where we do agree, and to use that list. It's going to be the next step, is once I've had this conversation with people, maybe modified what I have, I want to use that to actually start to assess some claims that are out there from politicians or from different types of sources, whether they be like academic sources from college or from government, and compare that to opinion sources or news sources, things like that. So you can make your own list, and you can compare it to my list, and you can compare it to the list of others. But the point is to kind of think deeply about this. I'm going to show you how quickly this could happen in real time with my own list, because it's actually a very simple activity and something anybody can do. I mean, you can ask your kids about this. I think this is just kind of a good conversation to have with each other, especially if we're having so much trouble communicating when it comes to politics or pretty much anything where there's conflict. If you have ground rules first, then maybe that can help us decide when we've made an error or when somebody else has made an error and changes have to be made. And, it can help you stay consistent. That's a big thing for me. That's what I want out of this. So if you value consistency, this might be the activity to do. So make that list of criteria, or if you want, I found that sometimes it can help to think about it in terms of kind of critical questions. So it doesn't have to be like a rule list, and I'll show you what I mean here in a second. But it really doesn't have to be rules. It can be like questions, or a series of questions or steps that you actively take when you hear a claim, or do you not take any steps, and why don't you? That's another thing that you might start to think about and engage with. And you can make this list in the comment section. You can, if you're seeing this on Facebook, you can make a video and send it to me. You can email it to me. And again, this isn't just restricted to conversations between me and my audience. I want the audience conversing with each other too, and I hope to be able to see some of those as well. And so I'm going to show you kind of my own list here, and maybe this will, if you're still confused about this or what I'm asking, maybe this can help. So I have my own list here that I've made in collaboration with students or a lot of people that I disagree with. Those are the type of people I tend to try to build this list with. And what you'll see, hopefully, is that it's really intuitive, that these ideas kind of cut to the core of what we would assume is true anyway. So we have the first kind of three that I use here. These are kind of like my three basic assumptions before I get to anything. And we can start with Descartes. That's another thing. And one thing that you'll notice if you look at this list any closer is that they're conversations that have already happened in the philosophical community. So they're answers that we've actually already gotten. But again, it's intuitive. It's not something that you have to be a philosopher to do. Anybody can do it, and it's really simple and intuitive. So we start with Descartes. He's going to say, "I think, therefore I am." Maybe you've heard that before, but his main point is that because he thinks, he exists. He's going to assume that he exists, essentially. Or that's actually his argument. But the point is, he assumes he exists. We tend to assume that we all exist too. So the universe exists and is knowable. So I also believe that the universe exists and that you can know it. If I didn't, I don't know how anybody would get around in the world if they didn't believe that you could have some knowledge about what's going on here. And then the last one, we cannot be sure of absolute truths. That's something that some of you might disagree with, which again, this is a conversation. This is again just stuff I've gathered from having conversations with people. I want to start with the list here and also these critical questions. So a lot of times I think if I can observe it, that's an intuition that I feel like a lot of us have. If I can observe it in some way, if I can see it, taste it, touch it, hear it, with any of my senses, I can be assured of its existence, or I can kind of start to make claims about what it is. But there's a problem there. So if any of you out there are kind of like astute critical thinkers, you've probably already caught on by now, because not everything that we observe, we're going to necessarily say is true, right? If you're famished and you're kind of dehydrated and you're in the desert and you start to see an oasis or water, right? You might in that moment think, well, I'm not actually seeing this. This is a mirage, right? We have this idea of illusions. And so how do we get around that? Well, we go to the second point, which is it independently verifiable? That's something else that we want to think about. So actually that's in the list form. It is independently verifiable. So if I'm hearing a claim, I also want to hear that claim, if it's observable, is independently verifiable. That means, I can look at it or somebody else can look at it. And so we kind of like parallel those to the critical questions real quick. Is the claim observable? That's kind of like the first critical question that I ask when someone makes a claim. If it's yes, then I go to question 2, which is what would it take for me to observe it? What reasonable steps could I take to observe it? Maybe it takes training. Maybe I need the right devices. Maybe they're really expensive. But the point is, can I conceivably observe it if I take a number of steps reliably? That reliably being the key word. It's like if I follow these steps, I will see or observe the thing. If you can't guarantee me that I can, then I'm not really interested in the claim. If that makes sense to you, great. Please do respond. Obviously that's your choice, but if you do like the video, if you think this is a good idea, you know all the things I'm sure to do when you like a video. And then lastly, there is a podcast that I made that relates to all the things that I've talked about. It's kind of like a longer version that I use with my co-host to set a standard for our podcast. So we've now decided when we bring somebody on the show or we're engaging with somebody or we have our own thoughts, that's a great thing about this list. It doesn't just have to do with other people and their claims. Do you do this when you make a claim in your own head? When you say something's true, do you go through this process of asking whether or not it's if you can actually prove it or it's observable, so on and so forth. And again, keeping in mind, I'm not saying this list is perfect. If there's something on this list that you think should be changed, get at me. Tell me what you think should be different and why you think it should be different. And if it makes sense, I will change what's going on here. So yeah, everybody, have a nice night and, kind of think and modify, adapt what's going on here. And, hopefully we can make some good will come of this. All right. Bye.